There is something you are carrying tonight, and somebody else put it there. That is the particular quality of the thing we are going to spend these hours with. It is not like a worry, which is about the future, and which at least has the decency to be your own. It is not like a regret, which is at least about something you did. This one was done to you. And that is what makes it so hard to put down, and why it survives so long, and why the ordinary advice about it fails so completely. Because underneath the grudge, always, sitting quietly and never saying anything out loud, is a perfectly reasonable objection. Why should I be the one who has to do the work? I am not going to argue with that tonight. It is a good question, and it has never once been answered properly by anybody telling somebody to forgive. What we are going to do instead is look at the arrangement, slowly, from several sides, over about 3 hours, in the way that you can only look at something in the middle of the night when nobody is asking you to be reasonable about it. And in particular, we are going to look at what the grudge is actually costing, and who is paying, and how often. Because it is not what most people think, and almost nobody has ever added it up. Before we go on, settle in properly. There is nowhere to be until morning, and nothing here to achieve. If you would like, feel free to share what time it is where you are, and what the weather is doing outside your window tonight. And if you would like to carry these quiet hours into other evenings, this channel is also on Spotify, and the link is waiting in the description below for whenever you want it, which does not have to be tonight. You do not need any background in Buddhism to be here. You do not need to concentrate or remember anything, or arrive anywhere by the end. There will be old teachings and slow stories and long stretches where very little happens, and none of it is a test. If your attention wanders off in the middle of a sentence and comes back 3 chapters later, that is not a failure. That is the sound of a person falling asleep, which is exactly what this is for. So let the body arrive. Let your weight be handed over completely to whatever is holding you. The mattress, the pillow, the blanket over your legs. Let the shoulders come down away from the ears. Let the jaw loosen. Let the hands rest wherever they have fallen. Take one slow breath in and let it go out again without managing the way it leaves. And let us begin with a piece of paper in a wallet. He is a builder, a small operation, himself and 2 lads and a van, 31 years of it, working mostly on extensions and loft conversions within the same 11 or 12 miles of where he grew up. And in the spring of 2009, he did a job for a man who did not pay him. The final payment was just under £4,000, which in 2009, in that business, in that particular year, was a very great deal of money, and was the difference between a reasonable spring and a bad one. The reasons the man gave were the usual ones, and they got progressively less honest as the months went on. First, there was a problem with a window, which there was not. Then there was a problem with the schedule, which there had never been at the time, and which nobody had mentioned in 11 weeks on site. Then there was a solicitor's letter that cost £200 and came to nothing whatsoever. Then there was silence, which went on for the better part of a year. And then, about 11 months after that, he saw the man across a car park at a garden centre on a Sunday. They looked at each other for about 1.5 seconds, and neither of them said a single word. He never got the money. He looked into it properly twice, and on both occasions it would have cost him more to chase than the debt was worth. That is the whole of the incident. There is nothing more to it and nothing hidden in it. It is not remarkable in any way. Anybody who has ever run a small business has one of these, and most of them have 3, and they will tell you about all 3 if you have the time. Here is the part that matters. He kept the invoice, not in a file with the rest of the paperwork from that year. That all went into a box in the garage in the ordinary way and has not been opened since. The invoice itself, the printed copy, folded into 4, in the back of his wallet, behind the cards, where it stayed, without a break, for 12 years. It went through 2 wallets. That is the detail that stops people when he tells it. When the first one finally came apart at the seams, around 2014, he sat at the kitchen table and moved everything across into the new one. Cards, the photograph, the folded bit of paper with the number of a plasterer on it, and the invoice went across with the rest of it. He remembers doing it. He remembers picking it up and putting it in, and he remembers thinking nothing whatsoever about it at the time, which is the part he finds odd now. It came out at petrol stations most weeks when he was after the fuel card. It came out at tills and at the tip, and once at a wedding when he was looking for something else entirely. His wife knew it was in there. She never said anything about it in 12 years, which is its own decision and probably the right one. And one of the lads knew, because it had fallen out on a site in about 2013, and he had picked it up off the boards and looked at it for a second and handed it back without a word, which is also a kind of conversation, and both of them understood it perfectly. By about 2016, the paper had gone soft as cloth, the way paper does when it lives against a body, and the fold lines had started to split at the corners. By then, you could not read the total without holding it up towards a light. And 12 years on, he was still telling people about it. That is the thing. 12 years on, at a family thing, or in a pub, or in a van with somebody he had just met, the subject of being messed about by customers would come up, and he would say, "I'll tell you what happened to me," and out it would come. The window that was supposedly wrong and was not. The business about the schedule. The solicitor's letter that cost him £200 and achieved nothing at all. And then the garden centre car park, which was always the last beat and always landed. Sometimes the invoice came out with it, onto the table, which is a thing that stops a conversation for a moment. He could do the whole thing in about 4 minutes, and he could do it extremely well, which is not surprising. He had told it something in the order of 1,000 times over 12 years. The pauses were in the right places. The funny bit was genuinely funny. It had been handled so often that it had gone smooth, like the handle of a tool that one man has used every day for a decade. The man died in 2021. He found out from somebody else entirely, at a job, in the way you do. Heart, apparently, and quite quick, and he had been ill for a while before that which nobody had known about. And the builder said the strangest thing about it was that he felt absolutely nothing. He had expected something, satisfaction possibly, which he was not proud of expecting, or a sort of closing over, or at the very least the sense of an account being settled by other means. And there was nothing there at all. Just a man he had not seen since a garden centre car park in 2010, dead at 66, and £4,000 that was now permanently and finally not coming. The invoice was still in his wallet on the day he heard, "Come back now, gently, to your own room," to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the first thing about grudges, and it is not obvious, and it changes the whole shape of the subject. A grudge is not a memory. It is a job. That is the distinction, and once you have seen it, you cannot lose it. A memory is something that happened and has since been put away. It sits there. It requires absolutely nothing from you. You are carrying tens of thousands of them at this moment, including a great many unpleasant ones, and between them, they are costing you nothing at all tonight. You have not thought about your first day at secondary school in 11 years. It is still in there. It is not doing anything. A grudge is not like that at all. A grudge is something you do. It is maintained. That is the word for it. It is kept current, the way a subscription is kept current. It is taken out and unfolded and looked at. The story is retold, which is also to say rehearsed, and the good bits are kept, and the parts that do not help are quietly dropped over the years. The details are polished. The timings get sharper. The wording of the sentence somebody said becomes more exact rather than less, which is not how ordinary memory works and should tell you something. And every so often, the whole file is reviewed from the beginning, usually at about 2 in the morning, to make quite sure that the case still stands up. It does. It always does. That is not a coincidence either. All of that is work, small amounts of it, done regularly, indefinitely, and never once entered on any account anywhere. And the man with the invoice was doing that work every single time that piece of paper came out of his wallet at a petrol pump, which was 2 or 3 times a week, for 12 years. Nobody is asking you to look at whether the thing that happened to you was wrong. It was wrong. That is not in dispute tonight, and it is not going to be. The question is much narrower, and it is this: what are you still doing about it, and how often, and what is it costing you? Now, this tradition has something to say about that, and it is worth being careful about the sourcing, because this particular subject attracts more invented quotations than almost any other. You will have heard the one about the hot coal. That holding a grudge is like picking up a hot coal to throw at somebody, and it is your own hand that gets burned. It is a good image, and I am going to use it more than once tonight, because it is genuinely useful, and it puts the cost in the right place. But I should say plainly that there is no good evidence the Buddha ever said it. It does not appear anywhere in the early collections, and nobody has ever produced a source for it. It is a modern line, well meant, that at some point acquired an ancient signature. What is actually there, and what is considerably older and rather sharper, is a set of lines near the very beginning of the Dhammapada. They describe a person turning something over. He abused me, he struck me, he defeated me, he robbed me. And they observe that in those who keep hold of thoughts like these, hatred does not come to an end, and in those who set them down, it does. That is all it says. It is worth noticing what it does not do. It is not a moral instruction. It does not tell anybody to be nice, or to be the bigger person, or to think kindly of anyone. It is closer to a piece of mechanics, or a note about how a system behaves. This is what happens if you keep running that sentence, and this is what happens if you stop. And notice what those verses put the emphasis on. Not the abuse, not the striking, or the defeating, or the robbing. Those are simply listed, flatly, without any argument about whether they happened. Nobody in those verses is being told that they imagined it, or that it was not so bad. What the emphasis falls on is the keeping hold, the harbouring, the turning of it over, the maintenance, which is a folded invoice in the back of a wallet, described 2,500 years before anybody had a wallet. Let us rest here for a while. Nothing has to be forgiven tonight. I want to say that early, and I will say it several more times before morning, because there is a great deal of pressure around this subject, and none of it is going to come from this room. Whatever you are carrying can stay exactly where it is until the light comes. We are only going to look at it, and looking at something is not the same as putting it down, and does not commit you to anything at all. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. Nobody's being judged in this room tonight, including you and including them. When you are ready, we will go on together. Because there is a piece of arithmetic in all of this that almost nobody does, and it is the single most useful thing in the first half of the night. There is a woman at a kitchen table with a pen and the back of an envelope doing a sum about her sister, and the answer is going to be considerably worse than she expects. Let us go and sit down opposite her. The kitchen is in a semi on the edge of a market town, and it is about 9:30 on a Wednesday evening in February. The dishwasher is doing the thing it does on that cycle, which everybody in the house has stopped hearing. She is 54, her sister is 51, and what happened in the spring of 2011 was about their mother's house. I am not going to go through the details, partly because they do not matter at all to the point, and partly because everybody listening has their own version of it and can drop that straight in. There was a house. There was a conversation about who had actually done what over the 8 years when their mother needed a great deal of help, and which of them had done more of it, and what that ought to mean. And there were some things said in a solicitor's office on a Tuesday in the March that could not afterwards be unsaid by anybody. And there was a sentence. There is always a sentence. Everybody listening to this has one, and can produce it instantly, and knows exactly where they were standing. Hers was 11 words long. It was about what her sister thought she had really been doing all those years with their mother, and what she had really been after. She can still hear the exact tone it was said in. She could reproduce it now, in this kitchen, 13 years later. That was 13 years ago. They still speak. That is worth establishing early, because this is not one of those stories when nobody has spoken for a decade. They see each other at Christmas, at one house or the other. They are at the same family things and they are perfectly civil at them. They text about their aunt, who is 91 and a considerable amount of work. Nobody watching them across a room would know a thing about it. But it is there. It has been there for 13 years, underneath every single conversation they have ever had since, including the ones about the aunt, like a stone in a shoe that neither of them mentions and both of them walk on. And on this particular Wednesday evening she is doing something she has never once done in 13 years and is not entirely sure why she is doing now. It has something to do with a conversation at work that afternoon about something else completely, and a woman saying, about her own situation, that she had worked out how many hours she had spent on it. She is working out, with a pen and the back of an envelope, how many times she has thought about it. She starts with the telling, because that is the easier one to count, She means the story properly, the whole thing, start to finish, out loud, to another person, her husband, many times, particularly in the first 2 years, probably twice a week and sometimes more. 2 friends repeatedly, one of whom has heard it so often that she can supply the details herself. A cousin, at some length, at a funeral. A woman she met on a course in Birmingham and never saw again. Her hairdresser, twice, 3 years apart. She got the telling to somewhere over 400 and stopped counting because it was clearly more than that. Then she does the harder one, which is the thinking. Not telling anybody, not saying a word to anyone. Just running it, privately, in her own head, with nobody in the room, in the car, in the shower, lying awake at 2:30, in the 11 minutes in a car outside a house before a family gathering, which is the reliable one and always has been, in the queue at the tip for no reason at all. And she sat there with a pen and worked out that if it were only once a week, which she knew perfectly well was far too low, then across 13 years that came to 680 times. And then she made herself be honest about it, which took another minute, because it was not once a week. For the first 3 years it was most days, and for a stretch in the middle of 2012 it was several times a day, and there was a fortnight around the anniversary of the solicitor's office when it was very nearly continuous. She wrote down 1200, which she thought was probably still on the low side, and then she sat and looked at the number for a while with the dishwasher going. 1200 separate occasions on which she had gone back into a solicitor's office in March 2011 and stood in it and heard 11 words in a particular tone. 1200. That is the number she wrote down on the back of an envelope on a Wednesday evening with the dishwasher going. And then she did the other half of the sum, which is the half that changed everything, and which took her about 4 seconds, and which she had somehow never once thought to do in 13 years. How many times has my sister thought about it? And she sat in that kitchen and realized that she genuinely had no idea. But she knew, with complete certainty, and without needing to think about it, that the answer was not 1200. She thought perhaps a dozen, possibly 20, because her sister is not a monster and is not a saint either, and is simply a woman of 51 getting on with a difficult life of her own that has had 2 redundancies and a divorce in it. And that woman had almost certainly thought about that afternoon a handful of times across 13 years, mostly when something reminded her. She had probably felt rather bad about it on each occasion for perhaps 90 seconds, and had then thought about something else, because there was a great deal else to think about. And she said to her husband, later that night, standing in the doorway of the bedroom with her toothbrush, the thing that is the whole of this chapter, and possibly the whole of tonight. I have been serving a sentence, and she does not know there was a trial. She did not do anything with it. That is worth saying, because there is a version of this story where she rings her sister the next morning and everything is repaired, and it did not happen, and it was never likely to. She put the envelope in the recycling and went to bed, and got up in the morning and went to work as usual. What changed was smaller and slower than that. She said that over the following year or so, she noticed herself starting the story in company and then not finishing it, just stopping partway through and saying something else instead, because she could hear it while she was saying it, and that at some point in the year after that, at a christening, She found herself standing next to her sister at a table of sandwiches and having an entirely ordinary 4-minute conversation about a car, which was not forgiveness and was not a reconciliation, and was simply 4 minutes in which she was not doing the job. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark, and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. That is the arithmetic, and I would like to go through it slowly, because it is the most useful thing anybody can know about this subject, and it takes about 2 minutes. A grudge feels like something that connects two people. That is how it presents itself, and it presents itself that way to everybody. There is you at this end. There is them at the other end. And stretched between the two of you, there is this thing, taut, live, under tension, with weight on both ends of it, the way a rope has weight on both ends. That is what it feels like at 2 a.m, and it is extremely convincing. But go and check, honestly, who is actually holding the other end? You are at both ends of it. Both. There is nobody else on the rope. They are not holding anything at all. In the great majority of cases, they are not thinking about it. Not tonight, not this month, and not for a considerable number of years. If you rang them up and asked, they would need a good deal of prompting to recall the details that you can recite in your sleep and in the correct order. Some of them would not be able to recall it at all, which is its own particular kind of insult and which nobody warns you about. And that is not because they are callous, particularly. Some of them are, but most of them are not. It is because that is how people are built, including you, about the things that you have done to other people. The wrong you have been carrying for 13 years is, from where they are standing, one afternoon in a difficult period, filed among several thousand other afternoons, with none of the significance and absolutely none of the polish, and they have their own version of that afternoon, in which they come out rather better and you come out rather worse, and which is not the same story as yours in almost any particular. They do not think about that one very much either, and this produces the fact that everybody who has ever held a grudge has felt, and very few have ever said out loud. It is entirely one-sided. The resentment is not reaching them. It is not landing anywhere. It has never once landed in 13 years on any night. There is simply no mechanism by which a person lying in the dark at 1 a.m. being extremely angry with somebody transmits anything whatsoever to that somebody, who is, at that moment, asleep, or watching television, or on holiday, or, in a good many of these cases, dead. That is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is not a figure of speech. It is a plain description of what is and is not happening tonight, which is where the hot coal image earns its keep, whoever came up with it. You are holding something extremely hot, and have been for years, in order to throw it at somebody who is not in the room, who has never been in the room, who does not know the room exists, and now the harder half of it, which the tradition does not shy away from, and which I am not going to either. The reason people go on holding it is that the grudge is doing something for them. That is not a criticism, and it is not said unkindly. The grudge is genuinely doing a job of work for you. It is worth knowing which job, because nobody can set a thing down without first understanding what it was propping up. Sometimes it is dignity, and this is the commonest one by a distance. The grudge is the only thing in the world still standing there saying, that was not all right, and somebody ought to mind about it. because very often nobody else does mind. Nobody was charged with anything. Nobody wrote it down. The other people in the family have moved along and would rather it were not mentioned at gatherings. So if nobody else is going to hold the position, then you will. Every day for 13 years at some cost, because the alternative feels precisely like agreeing that it was fine. And it was not fine. So the post gets manned. Sometimes it is identity, which is subtler and harder to see in oneself. Something happened that was large enough to organize a life around. And after enough years, the story of it has quietly become load-bearing. It explains things. It accounts for how you are about certain subjects, and why you do not go to certain places, and what you are like. Taking it away does not feel like relief. It feels like losing the shape of who you have been since 2011. And sometimes, in fact rather often, it is much simpler than either of those. Being angry is more bearable than being sad. It is more energetic. It has somewhere to go and something to do. It stands you up rather than sitting you down. And the grudge is the lid on something underneath that is a great deal harder to look at. We will come back to that one later tonight, because it is the biggest of the three by some distance, and it deserves a whole hour to itself. So here is where we have got to, at the end of the arithmetic, and none of it requires anything of you. You are doing all of the work, every hour of it. They are doing none, not 1 minute. And the thing you've been maintaining, at real cost to yourself, across a considerable stretch of your one life, is not reaching its target, and has never reached it, and never will. And underneath all of it, you have a perfectly good reason for carrying on, which we have not properly looked at yet, and which is not a foolish one. None of that has to be decided, or acted on, or resolved tonight. Let us rest here for a while. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without you arranging it. Nobody is in this room except you. That is worth noticing properly. Whoever it is, they are somewhere else entirely tonight. In another house, in another county, in another life, or nowhere at all. They are not thinking about it, and for the next few hours neither do you have to. When you are ready, we will go on together, because there is a very large misunderstanding sitting in the middle of this subject, and it stops more people than anything else, and it needs clearing out of the way before we go any further. Most people who refuse to forgive are refusing something that nobody is actually asking of them. There is a woman of 46 who forgave her father completely and has not seen him in 9 years and does not intend to, and she is not confused about any of it. Let us go and hear what she means. She is 46. She works in procurement for a hospital trust, which she is good at and mildly bored by. She has 2 children and a dog that was a mistake and is now beloved, and a perfectly ordinary life in a perfectly ordinary town. Her father is 78 and lives about 90 minutes away by car, which she knows precisely and has never once driven. They have not seen each other since a Sunday in the autumn of 2015, and they did not know at the time that it would be the last one. Now, I am not going to describe the childhood. It is not necessary for the point, and it is not mine to hand round, and everybody listening to this already has their own sense of what a bad one looks like from the outside and possibly from the inside. What matters for tonight is only this, that it was bad and that it went on for a very long time, and that the adults who could have stopped it were aware of it and did not. She spent the whole of her 20s furious, properly furious, not sulking, not brooding, the kind that costs a person jobs and 2 relationships that might have gone somewhere, and the best part of a decade that she does not particularly want back but would like to have spent differently. She spent her 30s in and out of various kinds of help. Some of it was useful and some of it was not, and one of the useful ones took 4 years to be useful. And then somewhere around 41, over a period of about 2 years, something changed. Not suddenly. There was no morning. There was no moment on a hillside, and nobody said anything remarkable to her. And it was certainly not because of a conversation with him, because there has never been one, and there is not going to be. She would say, if pressed on it, that she stopped needing him to have been different, not stopped wishing. She is very careful about that distinction and corrects people on it. She still wishes. She wishes it every time one of her own children does something ordinary and lovely, and she notices what a childhood is supposed to look like from the inside. She will go on wishing until she dies, and she does not regard that as a problem to be worked on. What stopped was the requirement. She stopped requiring the past to have been other than it was in order for her own life to be able to proceed. She stopped waking up every morning into a world whose first fact, before anything else in it, was what he had done. And she describes that as forgiveness. She's quite firm about the word. She's been offered several softer ones over the years by people who are uncomfortable, and she has declined all of them because she thinks the word is accurate and that giving it up would be giving up the thing itself. And she is equally firm in the same breath about the fact that she is never going to see him again. People find this confusing, and that is the thing she notices most. She has had it put to her more than once, usually by somebody perfectly kind and usually at a family occasion, that if she had really forgiven him, then surely she would be in touch by now. That surely, after all this time, at his age, and she says, no, those are 2 completely different things, and mixing them up is exactly what kept me in a state for 20 years, because I thought I had to do both or neither. She sends nothing. No cards, no birthdays. She does not ring at Christmas and has not since 2015. When he dies, which will be reasonably soon, she does not yet know what she will do about the funeral. She has decided not to decide in advance, which strikes her as the only honest position available. And she says that she has not thought about him with any real charge in it for about 4 years now. He comes up. Of course he comes up. But it is a good deal more like recalling a long, difficult period of weather than it is like opening a wound. There is one more thing she says about all this, and it is the part that surprises people most when she says it. The change was not that she came to feel better about him. She does not feel a great deal about him at all now, one way or the other. That is not warmth, and she's careful never to let anybody dress it up as warmth. What changed was the mornings. She said that for something like 20 years, the very first thing that arrived on waking, before the day, before the children, before what needed doing, was a sort of low background fact about her own life and where she had come from. Not a thought exactly, more like a weather report that was filed before she opened her eyes, and that somewhere around the age of 43, without any announcement, it simply stopped arriving. She could not tell you the week that it stopped, or the month, or even the year with any confidence. She simply noticed one ordinary morning in a Premier Inn on a work trip in the Midlands that she had been awake for about 4 minutes and had spent all 4 of them thinking about breakfast. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the clearing out, and I think it is the most practically useful chapter in the first half of tonight. There are 4 things that forgiveness gets routinely confused with. It is none of the 4, and a very large number of the people who are quite certain that they cannot forgive, and who have concluded something rather bleak about themselves as a result, are in fact refusing one of these 4 other things entirely correctly, and for good reasons that they have never been given permission to state out loud. So let us take them one at a time. It is not saying it was all right. This is the large one. It stops more people than the other 3 put together, and it stops them completely and permanently. If forgiving means signing a document that says the thing was acceptable, then no decent person could ever do it, and should never be asked to. And in that case, the refusal is not a failure of practice, or a lack of spiritual development, or a sign that somebody is stuck. It is integrity. It is a person declining to lie about something that mattered. But it does not mean that, and it never has, in this tradition, or in any other serious one. The wrongness of the thing is not on the table tonight. It is not being renegotiated. It is not up for review, and no part of the next 2 hours is going to ask you to soften your assessment of it by a single degree. What happened in that solicitor's office was what happened. What happened in that house was what happened. Nothing you do or decline to do in a dark room at this hour alters a fact about 2011 in any respect. The verdict stands. It was always going to stand, whatever happens tonight. It is simply not what any of this is about. It is not reconciling. Forgiveness happens in one person, on their own, in a kitchen or a car or a bed. Reconciliation requires 2 people, and a considerable amount of work from both of them, and a willingness on the other side that may simply not exist. And in some cases it is not advisable, and in some cases it is not safe, and nobody should be talked into it by a recording or by a relative or by anybody else. Those are 2 entirely separate operations, and only one of them is available to you unilaterally. You can forgive somebody entirely and never speak to them again for the rest of your life. That is not a contradiction. It is not a half measure or forgiveness with an asterisk, or something you have not quite finished. The woman with the father is not doing an incomplete version of this. She is doing the complete version of one thing, and correctly declining an entirely different thing, and she has thought about it a great deal more carefully than the people who keep suggesting otherwise. It is not trusting them again. Trust is a prediction about how somebody is likely to behave in the future. It is built out of evidence over time, and it is perfectly rational to withhold it from a person whose record is what it is. Forgiveness is about what you are carrying from the past. Those are different directions in time, and they have nothing to do with each other. You can put down every last ounce of resentment about what somebody did in 2011 and still decline to lend them money in 2026. You can still not leave them alone with anything that matters to you. You can still keep the arrangements arranged so that they are not in a position to do it a second time. None of that is bitterness. That is ordinary practical sense, of the sort that anybody would applaud in any other context. Forgiveness has never once required anybody to be a fool about the same person twice, and it is not something you owe them. This is the one that generates the most resistance in people, and the resistance is entirely justified, and I am not going to talk anybody out of it. Nobody is entitled to your forgiveness. Nobody has ever been entitled to it. It is not a debt. There is no obligation running from you towards the person who did the thing, and there is no ledger anywhere on which you are in arrears. And anybody who tells you otherwise deserves a second look, particularly anybody who happens to benefit from the peace that your forgiving would produce at family gatherings, and who would like the whole subject to be over so that Christmas can be easier. That is a request made for their own convenience, dressed up as a request made for your well-being. They are not the same thing, and you are allowed to notice the difference. So what is actually left once all four of those have been lifted out and set aside? Something a good deal smaller than people expect, entirely about you rather than about them, and available at any hour, in any state, without anybody's permission or cooperation or even their awareness. Forgiveness is putting down the daily work of resentment. That is all of it. There is nothing else in the definition. It is stopping the maintenance. It is not taking the invoice out at the petrol station. It is the 1200 going down to 1100, and then over a couple of years to something quite a lot lower, and eventually to a number that nobody would bother counting. It is simply a reduction in the amount of work being done. Nothing more dramatic than that, and nothing that anybody could photograph. It happens in your own kitchen, or in your car at a set of lights, or in a bed in the dark at 1 o'clock in the morning. It does not require a conversation. It does not require an apology, or an admission, or an acknowledgement of any kind. It does not require the other person's participation, or their agreement, or their knowledge that anything has taken place. It does not even require their continued existence, which is just as well, because a very large number of the people who need forgiving are dead. And notice what that means, which is the good news in this chapter. You do not need them for this. Whatever they did, whatever they still refuse to admit that they did, however unrepentant they were, or are, or will be to the end, however convinced they are of their own version, however many people in the family have taken their side without ever asking you a single question about it. None of that has any authority whatsoever over whether you go on doing this particular piece of daily work. That is the one part of the entire business that was always completely in your hands and nowhere else. It was in your hands in 2011, and it is in your hands tonight, and the person who did it has never had a vote on it, which is either the most annoying fact in this whole subject or the most freeing one, depending on the hour. And at 1 in the morning, it is generally the second. Let us rest here for a while. Nothing is being asked of you tonight, not one thing. Nothing is owed to anybody. No position has to be given up. No ground has to be conceded. No letter has to be written. And nobody at all has to be let back in through any door. If the whole of tonight amounts to a person lying in the dark hearing that they are not obliged to forgive anybody, then that would be a perfectly good use of 3 hours. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without you arranging it. Whatever happened, happened. It is finished and it is fixed, and nothing can reach it now. It is not happening in this room, in the dark, tonight. Nobody is in here, and it does not need to be guarded while you sleep, because there is nothing left to guard it against. When you are ready, we will go on together, because there is a question underneath all of this that we have circled twice and not yet asked properly. If the grudge costs so much and reaches nobody and does not require the other person's cooperation to put down, then why on earth does anybody keep one for 13 years? The answer is that it is holding something up. There is a man of 59 who was angry about a redundancy for 11 years, and who found out in about 90 seconds what the anger had been standing in front of. Let us go and find out with him. He was 59 years old when it happened, and he is 70 now, which tells you everything you need to know about how long this went on for. The company made components, not glamorous and not enormous. About 140 people on one site on the edge of a town, with a yard and a canteen and a car park that flooded. He had been there since he was 22 years old, 37 years in the same place, doing broadly the same thing. And in the restructure, they let him go. They kept a man 11 years younger who had been there for 6, which he could have lived with, and might even have agreed with on a good day. What he could not live with was how it was done. He found out in a small room off the main corridor, with a woman from head office who had flown in that morning, who called him by the wrong name once, and who did not know what the company made. 11 minutes, 37 years. The man who made the decision was the operations director. Call him the director, because that is what he became in the telling. He had a first name at the time, and they had been at each other's leaving do's and Christmas things for years, and he stopped having a first name in the story fairly early on, and never got it back. And for 11 years after that, that man was the reason for everything. The reason the last part of his working life went the way it did. The reason he took a job at 60 that he did not want, at a place 40 minutes away, doing something he could have done at 30. The reason he could not talk about the industry at all without his voice changing, which everybody who knew him could hear happening in real time. And the reason his son learned, at about the age of 34, to change the subject at a particular point in any conversation, and got quite skilled at it, and never once mentioned that he was doing it. And it was extremely well maintained. It had every feature we looked at in the first hour. The story was polished to a shine. The timings were exact, and got more exact rather than less. There was a full version of the meeting that he could deliver in about 11 minutes, with the woman from head office done as a rather good impression, which always got a laugh and which he always enjoyed getting. And then, in the 11th year, he was at a thing on a Friday evening, not a reunion. There was nothing left to have a reunion about, and the site had been flats for 6 years by then. Somebody's leaving do from a different firm entirely, in a function room above a pub, with about 40 people in it, and a buffet under cling film, and a man setting up a speaker that nobody wanted. And a man he had worked with in the 90s and had not seen since about 2004, said, in passing, holding a drink, in the way that people say things at those events, terrible business about the director, wasn't it?" And he said, "What business?" And the man said, "Oh." And there was a pause of about 2 seconds in which he could be seen to consider several options. And then, having started it, he told him. The director had lost a child, a daughter, 26 years old, in the February of the year of the restructure, which was about 5 months before the meeting in the small room off the corridor. It had not been in any newspaper. It had not been spoken about at work by anybody, ever, at any point. It had been handled entirely privately, in the way that some families of that sort still do, with about 11 people in total knowing anything at all. And he had gone back to work 8 days afterward, because that is what men of that generation and that sort did, and because there was a restructure to run, and it had been in motion since the spring, and he ran it, and it put 19 people out of a job, one of whom had been there 37 years, and found out from a woman who had flown in that morning. And then he had left the industry altogether within about a year and a half. Not moved on. Left. And nobody in that room had heard anything much of him since. That is the whole of it. 2 sentences from a man with a drink. That is the 90 seconds, after 11 years. He said he stood in that function room holding a plate with 2 sausage rolls on it. He remembers the sausage rolls. That is the sort of thing people remember. And he said the strangest part of the whole thing was not what he felt about the director, which was, in the end, fairly simple, and mostly consisted of nothing. It was what happened underneath, in the space that opened up, because as the anger drained out of him, over about 4 seconds, standing there with a plate, what came up in the space where it had been was not peace and was not relief. It was 37 years. He said it arrived like something physical, in a rush, all at once. The yard on a winter morning, the smell of the place, which he could produce instantly and had not thought about in a decade. A man called Alan, who had trained him in 1986 and had died in 2003, and had called everybody's son, including men older than himself, being 22 in that building with the whole of it ahead of him, and the fact that all of it was gone, and had been gone for 11 years, and that in 11 years he had somehow never once sat down and been sad about a single bit of it. He said he had to leave. He put the plate down on a windowsill and made his excuses and got out. And he went and sat in his car, in the car park of a hotel on a ring road, and cried for about 20 minutes, at 70 years of age, about a factory. He said he had not cried since his mother's funeral in 1998 and had rather assumed the mechanism had stopped working. He never contacted the director and does not intend to. He said there is nothing to say. He said what would it be? A card. And that the man would not want to hear from him and would probably not remember which one he was out of 19. But he stopped telling the story. That is the only measurable thing that changed. His son noticed it about 4 months later and mentioned it to his wife, and neither of them said anything to him about it, which was the right call. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the thing that story is for, and it is the biggest single reason that grudges last for decades. A grudge is very often scaffolding. It has been put up over something. It is holding the shape of it, and it is doing that job perfectly well. And while it is standing there, you do not have to look at whatever is underneath it. In fact, you cannot look at what is underneath it. That is not a side effect of the scaffolding. That is what the scaffolding is for. And what is underneath it, in the overwhelming majority of cases, is grief. Not the enormous, recognized kind. Not the kind with a funeral attached to it and people bringing casseroles. The unrecognized kind. The sort that never once got called grief by anybody, including the person carrying it, because nobody had died and there was no ceremony available, and it seemed frankly unreasonable to be mourning a job, or a version of your life that you had assumed would continue, or a friendship of 20 years that simply stopped, or a marriage that ended by agreement and was nobody's fault, or 37 years in a building with a particular smell. Nobody sends flowers for any of those. There is no acknowledged period afterward. You are expected at work on the Monday. That man was not angry for 11 years because he was an angry man by temperament. Ask anybody who worked with him and they will tell you he was not. He was angry for 11 years because anger was the only shape available. There was a loss the size of a working life sitting in the middle of him, and no permission anywhere to call it that. Not from his family, who were sympathetic about the job and would not have known what to do with the other thing. Not from the industry, and not from himself, because a man of that generation does not sit down and mourn a factory. So it came out in the only container that was to hand, which had a name and a face and a job title. And notice how well the arrangement worked, because that is the part worth understanding rather than judging. Anger is energetic. That is its first and most useful property. It has a direction. It points at something outside you. It stands a person up rather than sitting them down. And crucially, it gives you something to do at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is to run the case again from the top and confirm that it still holds. That is a task. It has a beginning and an end. You can complete it and feel briefly that something has been dealt with. Sadness has none of those properties whatsoever. Sadness sits you down. It takes your legs out from under you at inconvenient moments in supermarkets. It has no direction and points at nothing, and it does not tell you when it will be finished or whether it will. And there is nobody to be furious with, which for a great many people is considerably worse than the sadness itself. So the anger stays, not because anybody enjoys it, and not because it feels good, because it does not. It stays because it is a job that can be done, and the alternative is not a job at all. It is a thing that can only be undergone at length, with no end date and no way of doing it well. Now, I want to be careful, because there is a lazy version of this that is not true, and I am not saying it. I am not saying that everybody who is angry is really just sad underneath, and that the anger is therefore a mistake to be corrected. And I am certainly not saying that the wrong done to you was not really a wrong, and that you have simply mislabeled your own feelings about it. That is the sort of thing people say when what they actually want is for somebody to stop talking about it at family gatherings. The wrong was real. The director genuinely handled that badly. He should not have been running a restructure 8 days after burying his daughter, and somebody senior to him should have seen it and stopped it. And the fact that nobody did is a failure that belongs to that company. Losing a child does not undo the fact that 19 people were put out of work by a man who was in no state whatsoever to be making decisions about anybody's life. Both are true. That is the whole point of this chapter, and it will be the whole point of the next one. What I am saying is narrower. Ask what the grudge is standing in front of. Not tonight, necessarily, not as a task, just as a question that can be left in the room. If the resentment was simply gone tomorrow morning, lifted out overnight, what would be sitting in the space where it had been? Do not answer that quickly, and do not answer it out loud to anybody. For a great many people, the answer is grief, as it was for a man holding a plate in a function room. For some, it is fear, usually the fear of ever being that trusting, or that unguarded, or that easy to reach again. The grudge is not really about them at all. It is a policy about the future wearing a story about the past. And for some it is shame, which is by a distance the hardest of the three, and which has its own chapter much later tonight and will be treated properly there. And for some people, occasionally, the honest answer is nothing at all. Sometimes a grudge is simply a grudge. Sometimes a person behaved badly, and there was no hidden weight underneath it on your side either, and the whole thing is exactly what it looks like. That is a perfectly acceptable answer, and it does not mean you have looked wrongly. But it is worth asking the question once, quietly, without any pressure attached to the answer, and then leaving the whole thing entirely alone. Let us rest here for a while. Nothing has to be looked at tonight. Nothing at all. Nothing has to be dismantled at 1 in the morning. No scaffolding is coming down in the dark, which is not when scaffolding should ever be taken down by anybody. And there is nothing underneath any of this that has to be faced before the light comes. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. Whatever it has been holding up has been held up for years now, quite successfully, and it can go on holding it up for one more night without any assistance from you. When you are ready, we will go on together. Because there is a thing that happened in that function room that deserves its own hour, and it is the most misunderstood move in this entire subject. He learned something about the other man, and something changed, and it was not that the wrong became less wrong. There is a woman at a funeral tea learning what happened in 1979, and it explains a year that has bothered her for 4 decades. Let us go and stand by the sandwiches. The tea is in a village hall with a serving hatch and a stacking chair smell, and it is a Thursday afternoon in March. The sandwiches are the ones that always appear at these things, made by 3 women who have made them for 40 years, cut into triangles on the plates that live in the cupboard by the boiler. Her mother has been dead for 9 days and buried for about 2 hours. She is 52. She has done the reading, and she got through it, and several people have told her so. She has been managing the entire thing rather well, in the way that daughters do, from the hospital onward. And she is at that particular stage of the afternoon, where she is holding a cup and looking for somewhere to put it down, and an old woman she does not know very well at all takes her by the elbow. Somebody from the village, in her middle 80s, in a good coat, with a stick she does not lean on much. One of those people who exist at the edge of a family for 40 years without ever quite being in it, send Christmas cards, came to things, was described when she came up at all as the one who lived opposite Nana, and she says quite conversationally, as though continuing something, "You know she was never the same after 1979. And the daughter, who has a cup in her hand and nowhere to put it, says what happened in 1979. Now, the year matters to her enormously and has done for 4 decades, and nobody in that hall has any idea that it does. Because 1979 is the year she has always privately thought of as the year her mother went quiet. She was 7, and what she remembers from that year and the 2 that followed it is a woman who was in the house and was not in the house, who made the tea and did not sit down with it, who did not come to things at school that she had come to the year before, who was, in the word the daughter has always used to herself, and never out loud, flat, and she has carried that ever since. Not as a grudge exactly. She would never have used that word about her mother, and would have been offended if anybody else had. More as a small, permanent question, running underneath everything, about whether she had been quite wanted, which is the sort of thing that gets down into the foundations of a person at 7 years old and stays there quite happily through 3 decades of otherwise perfectly good adult life, a marriage, 2 children, and a career, and the old woman, holding a cup of tea at a hatch in a village hall, tells her there had been a baby between her and her brother in the spring of 1979, late on, at about 7 months, and it had gone the way that those things sometimes went then, and still sometimes go now. A boy, as it happened. There had been a name, and her mother had been sent home from the hospital on the Tuesday with a 7-year-old to collect from school on the Wednesday, and had been expected to get on with things, because that was the arrangement in 1979, in that part of the country, in that sort of family. There was no leave, there was no counselling, and nobody would have known the word. There was a district nurse who came once, and nobody spoke about it to her ever again. Not her husband, who found it unbearable and dealt with it by not mentioning it and never did mention it in 28 further years of marriage. Not the doctor, and not one single member of her own family, all of whom knew. The old woman knew all of it because she had been the neighbour across the road, and because she had been the one who took the 7-year-old for 2 days in the April, and because in every one of these stories somebody has to know, and it is usually a woman in a house opposite. The daughter said afterward that she stood at that hatch for quite a long time and could not work out what to do with her face, that there were about 60 people in the room, several of whom wanted to speak to her, and that she was aware of all of them and could not move, and that the thing which actually went through her in that first moment was not grief for her mother. That came later. It arrived at about 9 o'clock that same evening, when everybody had gone and she was washing up in a kitchen that was about to be emptied, and it went on in waves for the better part of a fortnight. But it was not the first thing. It was, arriving all at once and complete. She was not flat because of me. 4 decades of a small, permanent question, answered by a woman in a good coat at a serving hatch in about 11 words. She went back to the old woman about 6 weeks later, deliberately, with a cake, and got the rest of it, over about 2 hours, which is the only account of that year that exists anywhere, and which she wrote down afterward in a notebook that her own daughter will read one day. She said the strangest part was how ordinary the woman was about it. No drama. 2 hours, a pot of tea, and a great deal of practical detail about who did what and when, told the way that generation tells things. At the end of the 2 hours, she said, putting the cups on the tray, I always thought that somebody in that family ought to know. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the move that both of those stories have in common, and it is the one that gets misunderstood more than anything else in this subject, and it is worth getting exactly right. Understanding is not excusing. Those are two entirely different operations performed by different parts of a person, and almost everybody runs them together into one, which is exactly why people resist this so hard. And the resistance is not stupidity. It is a perfectly intelligent defense of something that matters. If understanding meant excusing, then learning why somebody did a thing would automatically let them off it, which would mean that curiosity was dangerous, that every fact you learned about the other person's circumstances would quietly subtract something from your own claim. And nobody who has been genuinely wronged is going to accept an arrangement like that, nor should they. Under those terms, the only safe position is to know as little as possible and to refuse all new information. So people refuse to look. That is a rational response to a false rule. They will not hear the second story. They change the subject when somebody starts on it. Or they say, I don't want to hear it. Or they say there's no excuse for what he did, which is true and is also not what was being offered. And they are protecting something real when they do that. They are protecting the fact that it was wrong, which is the only thing they have left of the whole business. But it does not work like that. The daughter did not walk away from that hatch having concluded that it was perfectly fine to be an absent mother to a 7-year-old for 3 years. She still wishes that somebody, anybody, had noticed her in 1980. She wishes her father had said one sentence about it at any point in the following 28 years. She has views about the district nurse. None of that was retracted. And the man in the function room did not conclude that the restructure had been well handled, or that 11 minutes with a stranger was an acceptable way to end 37 years. He thinks that to this day. Would say so now. What changed in both cases was not the verdict on the event. It was the sentence they had been telling themselves about what the event meant about them. And in both cases, that sentence had the same shape, which is the shape they nearly always have. It was about me. She was flat because of me, because of what I was like as a 7-year-old, or because I was not enough to bring her back. He got rid of me because of what he thought of me, because 37 years counted for nothing next to what he had privately concluded about my value. My sister said that because that is what she has always secretly believed about my character, and the solicitor's office was simply where it finally came out. Every one of those has the same architecture. The event, plus a conclusion about the self, welded together so tightly that after a few years they can no longer be pulled apart. And it is the sentence that does the damage, not the event. The event happened once and finished. The sentence has been running ever since. And the second story does not remove the event, which is fixed and is not going anywhere. It does not remove the wrong, which stands exactly where it stood. What it removes is the aboutness. It turns out that you were standing in the path of something enormous that had nothing whatever to do with you. A dead daughter, 5 months back, never mentioned in that building by anybody. A dead baby, and a family that did not speak of it, and a country in 1979 that had no words available for it, and would not have used them if it had. A man who was drinking, or terrified about money in a way he would rather have died than say out loud, or repeating, almost line for line, something that was done to him in 1962 by somebody who is also dead, none of which you caused, none of which you were at 7 or 22 or 40 in any position to have altered, and that is a smaller and considerably colder consolation than people expect it to be. It does not make anybody feel warm towards anybody. It is not a reconciliation, and it does not produce love or even much sympathy, particularly not at first. What it does is take a weight off one very specific and load-bearing beam, the belief that this happened because of something true about you. That beam has been carrying a great deal for a very long time, and when the weight comes off it, most people do not feel joy. They feel tired and slightly foolish and rather quiet for about a fortnight. Now, the honest half, which most people leave out. Sometimes there is no second story. Sometimes you go looking and there is genuinely nothing there. No bereavement, no terrible year, no childhood of their own that explains it. Some people were having a perfectly good week and knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway because it suited them, and would do it again tomorrow and have done it since to somebody else. That happens. It is not rare, and nothing in this teaching requires you to go and invent a redeeming context for a person who does not have one. Any version of it that does require that is asking you to tell a lie about your own life in order to feel better, and it will not work anyway, because you will know. So if you go looking and find nothing at all, that is a complete answer in itself, and you are allowed to stop looking and never look again, because here is the thing that holds in either case, and it is the reason this chapter is not a matter of luck. You do not need the second story in order to put the work down. The second story helps enormously when it exists. It is a shortcut. It is a genuine gift, and it tends to arrive without any warning at all, at funerals, in function rooms, from old women holding cups of tea, decades after anybody needed it. You cannot go and get one. That is worth knowing. People spend years trying to obtain one from somebody who does not have it to give, but the arithmetic from earlier tonight is entirely unchanged by its absence. The 1200 is still 1200. The invoice is still in the wallet. The maintenance is still maintenance and still costs the same, and is still being done by one person on their own. The hand holding the coal is your own hand, whether or not the person who threw it had a reason for throwing it. That is the same on both sides of this, and it is why the chapter does not depend on anybody's luck. Let us rest here for a while. You are not required to understand anybody tonight. You are not required to go looking for anything, or to ask anybody a question you do not want the answer to, or to be curious about a person you would rather not think about at all. And if somebody tries to tell you their second story tomorrow, or somebody else's, you are entirely allowed to decline it and to say so. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. And if there is a sentence somewhere in you tonight that begins with, "It was because of me," about a mother who went quiet, or a job that ended, or somebody who left, then that is the one sentence worth noticing before you sleep. You can put that one down on its own. It does not require you to settle anything else, or forgive anybody, or reach any conclusion at all about the person involved. When you are ready, we will go on together, because there is a thing a great many people are waiting for, and it is never coming, and the waiting is costing more than the wrong did. There is a man of 55 in a hospital bay on the last afternoon, and there are 4 minutes left, and the thing is not going to be said. Let us go and sit in that chair with him. The bay has 4 beds in it, and 3 of them are occupied. There is a whiteboard by the door with the names on it in green marker pen, and a column for who is looking after whom, and one of the names has been rubbed out and written in again slightly larger. There is a radiator under the window that is too hot and cannot be adjusted. It is about 3:20 on a Tuesday afternoon in November. He is 55. His father is 83 and has about a day and a half left, although nobody has said that in so many words, and everybody in that bay knows it. And between the two of them, there is a thing that has never once been said. I am not going to specify it, and that is deliberate, because the shape is the same in about 11,000 families, and the details only get in the way. It was in 1994. He was 26. It involved money, and a decision that was taken about which nobody consulted him, and which affected the next decade of his life rather than anybody else's. And then a period afterward of about 4 years in which the entire arrangement of that family quietly rearranged itself around a fact that was never once stated out loud by anybody, at any gathering, in any room. Everybody knew. Nobody said, "That is the shape of it." He has now waited 29 years for his father to say something, anything at all, about it. Not an apology, particularly. He would tell you that, and he has told his wife more than once, at some length, usually after a family occasion. He does not need the word sorry, and would probably find it embarrassing. What he needs is an acknowledgement, some indication of any size, in any form, that the man knows it happened, that he knows what it did afterward, and that he has, at some point across 29 years, sat down and thought about it for more than a minute. 4 words would do it. He has, over the years, worked out which 4, and he has come close to asking, 4 or 5 times across 3 decades, which is not many, and which is more than most people manage. In a car park in 2003, after a funeral, with the engine running. On a walk in about 2011, on a path where there was nobody else about and nothing to interrupt, which is the closest he ever came. And at a hospital twice in the last 18 months, once in a corridor and once in this chair, about a fortnight ago. And he has never once done it, for reasons that are entirely comprehensible, and that anybody who has ever been in that chair will recognize immediately without needing them explained. Because there are only 2 possible answers. Either the man says something, and then the whole edifice comes down at once in a 4-bed bay with 2 other families 12 feet away and a nurse due in at 4. There would be a scene at the end of somebody's life with nothing afterward in which to put it right. Or the man says, "What are you talking about?" And that second one is the real reason it has never been asked. Not the scene. That. Not because it would be a lie. He could survive a lie. He has survived several. Because it might very well be true. The man might genuinely have no idea what he is being asked about, and might say so quite mildly, and might then go back to sleep, and that would be worse than anything else that could happen in that room, and it cannot be unasked once it has been asked. So he does not ask. He sits in the chair. They talk about the football. Neither of them cares about football, and both of them have been using it for 40 years, which is what it is for. They talk about one of the nurses, who is Portuguese and very good. They talk about his brother's flight, and whether he will make the connection, and what the traffic is like from the airport. His father sleeps for about 20 minutes in the middle of the afternoon, quite suddenly, the way people do at that stage. And he sits in the chair and looks at the whiteboard and reads the names of 3 strangers and works out from the columns which nurse is on until when. And at about 5:10, when it is getting dark outside, his father wakes up and says something about the greenhouse, something entirely practical, about the glass in the greenhouse and the 2 panes at the far end that went in the wind in February, and who to ring about it, and what they charged last time, which is nonsense. The house is going to be sold within 6 months, and everybody in that bay knows it, and there is not going to be a greenhouse. And he says, yes, all right, I'll sort it. And his father says, good. And that is the last full conversation the 2 of them ever have. There is another day after that, and a portion of the day following, and he is there for most of both. But it is not conversation by then, in any sense that either of them would have recognized, and he knows it at the time. The thing was never said. He sorted out the greenhouse. That is the part he tells people, when he tells any of it. The house was sold in the June, and before it went on the market, he drove over on 2 consecutive Saturdays and reglazed a greenhouse that nobody was ever going to use. His wife asked him why, once, and he said he did not know, and that was true at the time. He thinks now that it was the only thing that had actually been asked of him in 29 years, and that he had said yes to it, and that it seemed important to have meant the yes. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the chapter that a great many people listening to this need more than any of the others, and it is the hardest one to hear. Nobody is coming to apologize. Not tonight, not in the spring, not at a wedding or a christening or after a diagnosis, and not in the hospital bay at the end, which is where an enormous number of people are quietly waiting for it to happen, because that is where it happens in films and because it is the last place available. And it is worth being honest about the reasons, because there are several and none of them are what people assume. Some of them are dead. That is the simplest reason, and it covers a great many cases. A very large proportion of the people in this country who owe somebody an acknowledgement are no longer in any position to give one, and no amount of waiting or wanting or deserving makes the slightest difference to that. Some of them genuinely do not remember, not as a strategy, not as a convenient forgetting that they could recover if pressed. The thing that reorganized the whole of your life was, at their end of it, a Tuesday. A decision taken in 11 minutes among about 40 other decisions that month. And it has gone the way that Tuesdays go, which is completely. Some of them remember it perfectly well and hold an entirely different account of it. In their version, they were provoked, or they were doing their absolute best in circumstances that you knew nothing whatsoever about at the time, and still do not. Or the thing that you regard as the injury was in fact a fairly measured response to something that you did first, which they can also describe in some detail, and have, to other people. Some of them cannot say it. This is the largest group by a distance, and the least understood by anybody. They know. They know exactly what they did, and they have known for 30 years, and it is in them somewhere at 3 in the morning as well. And saying it out loud in daylight to your face would require them to be a person who did that, not a person who made a mistake, a person who did that to their own child, and then let 30 years go by without mentioning it. And there is no route from where they are standing to that admission that does not go through considerably more than they believe they can survive. So they stand where they are and talk about the football and die there. That is what is going on inside a great many silent fathers. And from the outside, it is completely and utterly indistinguishable from not caring, which is the cruelest part of the whole arrangement, and which cannot be fixed from your side. That is what is going on in a great many silent fathers, and it is not indifference, and from the outside it is completely indistinguishable from indifference, and some of them, a small number but not none, simply do not care, did not then and do not now. So here is the position, and I would rather say it plainly than dress it up. If your peace requires their acknowledgement, your peace is in somebody else's hands, and in most cases it is in the hands of the one person who has already demonstrated at considerable length and with supporting evidence that they are not reliable with things belonging to you, which is, when you put it like that, a strange place to have left it. That is the trap. It is worth seeing it clearly and without flinching, because it is the entire reason that people spend 30 years in a waiting room that has no door at the far end. The wrong took an afternoon. The waiting has taken 3 decades and is still going and was never once agreed to by anybody. Now, what actually helps here is not a technique, and it is not a way of getting the apology. It is a distinction, and it is the last useful thing in the first 2/3 of tonight. There is what happened, and there is the sentence in you that says it should not have. Those are 2 separate objects, and they have been welded together for so long that most people have never seen them apart. The first one is entirely fixed. It is 1994. It is finished. It is beyond the reach of anybody now living, including the person who did it, who could not undo it tonight, even if he wanted to more than anything in the world. Nothing whatsoever can be done about the first one by anybody, ever. The second one is running tonight, in this room, at this hour, in a warm bed 30 years later, in a house where none of it is happening. He should have said something. He should have known. Somebody should have noticed. It should not have been like that. And every time that runs, it produces a small amount of fresh pain about an event that has been over for 29 years. Now, I want to be careful here, because the shallow version of this is unbearable, and I am not saying it. I am not saying that it should have happened, or that there was some hidden rightness in it, or that it was all for the best and made you who you are. It should not have happened. It was wrong when it happened, and it is wrong tonight, and it will still be wrong in 100 years when nobody involved is alive to remember it. None of that is being revised. What I am saying is narrower, and it is about tonight only. Insisting at 1 o'clock in the morning, in the dark, that the past be different from what it is. That is the single demand in the whole universe that is guaranteed to be refused. Every single time it is made, without one exception, for as long as you go on making it, which for some people is 50 years, and each refusal takes something out of you, not much, individually, a few minutes and a bit of the night, multiplied by 1200, The man in the chair by that bed spent 29 years waiting for 4 words. He did not get them. And what he told somebody afterward, about a year later, is a thing worth taking out of this chapter. He said, "I think what I was actually waiting for all that time was for him to release me. And he could not do it, not would not, could not. He did not have it to give, and I had been standing there with my hand out for 29 years. And then he said, so I suppose it was always going to have to be me. Let us rest here for a while. Nobody is coming tonight. That is not a bleak thing at this hour. It is quite a restful one. There is no conversation to prepare for and no arrival to listen out for. Whatever was going to be said in your life has either been said or has not been said, and either way that part of it is finished and settled. The night is entirely free of it. There is nothing due in. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. You are not waiting for anything at all between now and the morning. Nothing is due to arrive and nobody is on their way. When you are ready, we will go on together. Because there is a practical objection to all of this that anybody sensible will have raised by now, and it is the one that makes people give up on the whole business. People try this. They put it down properly and sincerely, and then 3 weeks later it is back, and they conclude that it did not work, and that they are not capable of it. There is a woman who forgave the same person about 40 times over 9 years, and who is quite clear that this is not a failure. Let us go and hear why. She is a district nurse, and she is 52, and she's been doing that job for 26 years in the same 3 or 4 square miles. The thing happened in 2015, and it was to do with her daughter, who was 19 at the time. That is as much as anybody needs, and it is as much as I am going to say. It was serious. It involved a person whose actual job it was to be looking after her daughter's interests, and who did not do that job, and who was never held to account for it by anybody in any way. And there were consequences that ran on for several years afterward, and are not entirely finished now. And she did the work. That is the point of this chapter. She's not somebody who avoided the subject. She went at it properly, in the way that district nurses go at things, which is thoroughly and without much patience for nonsense. She thought about it properly. She talked to 2 people who were qualified to be talked to. Over about 18 months, she read a certain amount, some of which was useful and some of which was not. And in about the spring of 2017, sitting in her car outside a house on a round with 11 minutes before the next call, she came to a genuine and considered position, which was that she was going to stop carrying it. Not that it had been acceptable, not that she would be seeing anybody, simply that she was not going to go on doing this particular work for the rest of her life, because she had looked at what it was costing and decided against. She meant it entirely. It was not a mood, and it was not a resolution. And she said the genuinely strange thing was that it worked. Properly, not partially. She said the difference was enormous, and that other people noticed it without knowing why. For about 5 weeks. And then, on an ordinary Saturday, a woman in a shop said something entirely innocent about a school. Nothing pointed. Nothing to do with any of it. A remark about uniform. And it came back. Complete. At full strength. With everything in it. Exactly as it had been in 2015. and not diminished by a single degree. She said she was standing by the till and could not remember what she had come in for. And she said her first thought, standing there by the till, was, well, that was pointless then. She spent the next 6 months in that position, which is, incidentally, the position that most people end up in permanently and stay in for the rest of their lives. That she had tried it properly and sincerely, having read about it and thought about it and meant it, that it had not held, and that she must therefore be one of those people who simply cannot do this, and had better stop pretending otherwise. And what got her out of it was not a book, and not either of the two people who were qualified to be talked to. It was a woman she worked with, about 63, 3 years off retiring, who had buried her husband in 2009 and did not say a great deal about anything. They were doing a shared round, which they did about once a fortnight, and had been talking about something else entirely, and she said, without looking over, in a car, between calls, "You know you have to do it more than once." That was all. 10 words. That was the entire intervention, and there was no follow-up, and they went into the next house and did the dressing on a man's leg. And she said it landed like somebody switching a light on in a room she had been standing in for 2 years. Because up until that moment in that car, she had genuinely and completely believed that forgiveness was an event, a door, something you walked through once, in one direction, correctly, after which you were on the other side of it, and that was that. Nobody had ever told her otherwise. It had simply never occurred to her that it could be anything else, and she is not a stupid woman and had thought about it a great deal. And what that woman was telling her in 10 words was that it is not a door at all. She reckons she has done it something like 40 times since 2015, and she is a woman who counts things, sometimes with a good deal of ceremony, sitting down on purpose in the front room, having decided that morning to do it, and sometimes in about 11 seconds at a set of traffic lights on the ring road with the indicator going. Both of those count the same. That is the part she wants people to know, and the intervals have got longer. That is the only measure she trusts, and the only one she recommends. It used to be days. In 2016 it was most days, and some days more than once. Then it was weeks, for a long stretch around 2019, which she barely noticed happening. It is now something like twice a year, usually in the autumn, for reasons she has never worked out. And when it comes, it lasts about an afternoon rather than a fortnight. And she says she has stopped expecting it ever to be finished, which sounds like a defeat and is the exact opposite. It was the thing that made the whole business possible, because a practice you expect to be finishing is a practice you are constantly failing at. The woman in the car retired in 2021, and they still send each other cards. She has never mentioned it to her, not once, in 8 years. She has thought about saying something about it several times, and has never found a way that did not sound enormous. The woman has no idea that she said anything of any consequence in a Vauxhall Corsa on a Tuesday between calls, and would be baffled to be told, and would probably say she could not remember it, which is how nearly all of the most useful things anybody has ever said to anybody get said. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the correction, and it is the most practically useful thing in the second half of the night. Forgiveness is not an event. It is a practice. Almost everybody has the wrong model of it. And the wrong model, rather than the difficulty of the thing itself, is what causes people to give up. The wrong model says this: forgiveness is a decision, made once properly with sufficient sincerity, after which it holds, like signing something, like a door that closes behind you with a click, after which you are on the other side of it, and the room you are in is no longer available. It is a very appealing model. It is how it works in films, and it is roughly how people describe it afterwards, because nobody tells you about the 40 times. And under that model, the very first time it comes back, you have failed. The evidence is right there in front of you, and it is not arguable. You said you had put it down. You meant it when you said it. And here it is again at 2 o'clock in the morning, complete, with every detail intact and the tone of voice included, which can only mean that you did not really mean it, or that you are not the sort of person who can, or that the thing is simply too big for you. So people conclude that they are not capable of it, or that the wrong was too big, or that they are a bitter person, and they stop trying. And the stopping is not caused by the grudge. It is caused by a bad model of what they were attempting. The correct model is much less dramatic and much more forgiving of the person doing it. It is a practice, like anything else that has to be done more than once. And returning is not failure. Returning is the practice. That is a sentence, and it comes straight out of the meditative tradition, where it has been understood for a very long time and applied to something much smaller. Anybody who has ever sat down deliberately to watch their own breathing knows exactly how this goes. You watch one breath, you watch a second breath, rather pleased with yourself, and somewhere in the third one, you are thinking about a car park in 2003, and you have been for some time, and you have no idea when it started. And the instruction in every single tradition that has ever taught this is not, do not wander. Nobody has ever been told that, because nobody has ever managed it, including the people who spend 40 years at it in robes. The instruction is simply, come back. And the coming back is not the interruption of the exercise. The coming back is the exercise. That is the whole of it. That is the repetition that does whatever work is being done. A session in which you wandered off 40 times and came back 40 times is not a worse session than one in which you came back twice. By the only measure that matters, it is a considerably better one, because it contained 38 more repetitions. Nobody who teaches this would even hesitate about that. It is only the person doing it who thinks they have failed. And the same thing is exactly and precisely true here, with a grudge, at 2 in the morning, 13 years on. The thing comes back. It came back for that woman 5 weeks later in a shop, and it will come back for you. And it will come back with all its details and its tone of voice. And what you do about it is exactly what she did about 40 times. And it is not impressive and does not need to be. You notice that the file has been opened. That is genuinely the hardest part, because most of the time it opens without any announcement, and you can be 4 minutes into reading it before you realize what you are doing. And then you close it. That is all. There is nothing else in the instruction. It does not require a ceremony or a decision or any particular state of mind. It does not have to be done well. It can be done in 11 seconds at a set of traffic lights with the indicator going, and it counts exactly as much as the version done sitting down. Now, the measure. Because people want to know whether it is working, and the usual measure is wrong. The measure is not, has it gone? It will not go. Not this year, and probably not ever. And that is not a bleak statement. It is simply how memory works in a human being who was paying attention at the time. Do not use that as your test. It will tell you that you have failed on every occasion you consulted for the rest of your life. The measure is the interval. How long between the visits? That is the first thing to watch and the only one that moves early. Then how long each one lasts once it arrives. And then, much later, how much charge is in them when they come. Whether the thing arrives at full voltage or whether it turns up rather flat, like an old argument you can no longer be bothered to have. Days becoming weeks, weeks becoming twice a year in the autumn, an afternoon rather than a fortnight. Nobody notices any of that happening while it is happening. That is worth knowing in advance, because otherwise you will go looking for progress and conclude there is none. You only ever see it looking backwards, and usually by accident, usually because somebody mentions the person's name in an ordinary conversation, and you hear it, and you notice about 4 seconds later that nothing much occurred in you when they said it. No lurch, no heat, just a name belonging to somebody you used to know. Let us rest here for a while. If it comes back tonight, in the next 20 minutes, or at 4 in the morning, that is not a failure of anything at all. It is not evidence about you or about your character or about how much you have or have not moved on. It is simply the thing doing what the thing does, which is to arrive at intervals, generally at this hour, generally when the house has gone quiet and there is nothing else competing for the room. You do not have to argue with it. You do not have to check whether the case still stands up, because it does, and you already know that, and it will still stand up in the morning. You can simply notice that it has arrived, and let it go past, and let it come again, and let that one go past too. 40 times if that is what tonight requires. Every single one of those counts, and the 40th counts exactly as much as the first. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. Nothing has to hold tonight. Nothing has to last or stick or prove anything. It only has to be set down for the next few hours. And it can be picked straight back up in the morning if it turns out that you want it. And a great many people find that they do for quite a long time. And that is entirely all right. When you are ready, we will go on together, quietly, for the long rest of the night. Because there is a thing that happens in the body when a weight comes off, and everybody has felt it, and it is the closest most people ever get to knowing what this would feel like. There is a woman at the top of a hill in the Lake District taking a rucksack off after 4 hours, and what happens next is the strangest sensation in ordinary life. Let us go up there and put it down with her. The pack weighs about 14 kilos, which is rather more than it needs to. She has brought a stove that she will not use once in 3 days, because the places she is staying do food, and a book that she will not open, because by 9 o'clock each evening she is not reading anything. Everybody does this. Everybody who has ever packed a bag carries about 3 kilos of things they were slightly frightened of not having. She is 48. It is early September in the Lake District. on one of those weeks that turns out better than the forecast, and she has been walking since about 8:30 in the morning. It is the second day of 3. The first day was flat and along a river and did not teach her anything at all. Today has been 4 hours of going up, and it has done the thing that hills do, where the top of it keeps turning out not to be the top of it. 3 separate times, 3 separate moments of arriving at what was clearly the summit and finding another 200 feet of it behind, each of them slightly funnier than the last, the third one out loud. The straps have been on her shoulders since 8:30 this morning, nearly 5 hours, with 2 short stops in them, and she has stopped noticing them entirely, which is what always happens, and which is the whole point of walking all the way up here at 1 in the morning. That is worth saying slowly, because everything else in this chapter comes out of it. By hour 3, she is not aware that she is carrying anything at all. She knows it intellectually, of course. If you stopped her on the path and asked, she would say, yes, obviously, I have a rucksack on, and she would think it a strange question. But the actual sensation of it has gone. The compression across the tops of the shoulders, the belt sitting on the hips and taking most of it, the small constant work of the 2 long muscles either side of the spine, holding her upright against 14 kilos that would otherwise pull her backwards down a hill. All of that stopped being reported somewhere around 10 o'clock in the morning, and she did not notice it stopping. The body does that with everything. It has to. A nervous system that reported every constant sensation all the time at full volume would be completely useless. You would never hear a twig break. You would never notice the one thing that had changed. So it filters everything. It reports the differences and it ignores the constants. And it does all of that entirely without ever consulting you about any of it. So the weight stops being a thing in the day and becomes the shape of the day. It becomes how walking feels. It becomes what her legs are doing and how her breathing goes on a slope and how often she stops. It becomes, without anybody deciding it, and without any moment at which it happened, simply what it is like to be her, on that hill, this morning. And then, at about 1:30, she gets to the top, the actual one. There is a cairn, built up over years by people adding stones to it. There is a view of about 4 other hills, and a reservoir a long way below, and a farm, and the road she drove in on yesterday, looking like something drawn with a pencil. And there is a wind that was not there 30 feet lower down, which is always a surprise, and which arrives all at once. And she takes the pack off. That is all that happens. It takes about 8 seconds. She unclips the hip belt first, which is the one that has been doing most of the work. Then the sternum strap across the chest. And then she shrugs one shoulder out, and then the other, and lets the whole thing come down her back and onto the grass beside her with the particular sound that a heavy pack makes when it lands. And what happens in the next 30 seconds is the entire reason we have walked all the way up here. Her arms float, not metaphorically, physically, actually, visibly. They come up slightly of their own accord, without any instruction from her at all, because the muscles across the top of the shoulders have been working steadily for 4 hours against 14 kilos, and they are still working, and there is suddenly nothing there to work against. It takes a minute or 2 for them to get the message and stand down. Everybody who has ever carried a heavy pack knows this happens, and nobody ever mentions it to anybody, because it sounds like nothing at all when you try to say it out loud. She said it felt like being about to lift off the ground. She said she laughed out loud on her own on a hilltop, which she has not done since she was a child. And then the second thing, which is stranger than the first and lasts a great deal longer. She feels the absence, not the relief, which is a different thing and comes later. The absence itself as a positive sensation, with a shape and a location. Her shoulders feel wrong. Her back feels wrong in a way that is entirely pleasant and slightly disorientating. Her whole upper body is busily reporting the presence of something that is no longer there, and will go on reporting it for a good 20 minutes. She said she could still feel the straps at 4 o'clock that afternoon, sitting outside a pub at the bottom of the valley with a drink in front of her, hours after the pack had gone into the back of a car. 2 lines across the shoulders that were not there. She sat on a rock out of the wind and had a cheese sandwich, and could not stop noticing her own shoulders, and thought that this was a very strange thing to be paying attention to at the top of a hill with that view in front of her. And then she said, out loud, to nobody, on a hilltop in September, the thing that everybody who has ever done this says in one form or another. I had no idea it was that heavy until I put it down. Come back now, gently, to your own room, to the pillow and the dark and the weight of the blanket over you, and your own breathing going quietly on without you. That is the whole of the chapter, and there is nothing more to understand tonight, and no more argument coming. You cannot feel the weight of a thing you have carried continuously, not because you are careless, or not paying attention, or somehow less self-aware than other people, because that is how a body works, and how a mind works, and there is no version of a human being anywhere who does not do this. The people who are best at noticing things do it too. A signal that never changes stops being reported. That is not a flaw in the system. That is the system working properly, and it is why you are not currently aware of your own socks. And the grudge, at some point that nobody could date, became the shape of the day rather than a thing in the day. It stopped being something you were carrying and became simply how walking feels, how mornings feel, how it feels to be you in your particular life, with your particular history. It became normal, simply the background condition of a life, which is not remotely the same thing as light, and the only way that anybody ever finds out what a thing weighed is afterward, never during. Not once for anybody in the whole history of carrying things. So we are not going to do anything at all about yours tonight. We are simply going to put the whole of it down for a few hours. The way you would put a pack down at the top of a hill. Unclip the hip belt, then the sternum strap, one shoulder and then the other, and let it go onto the grass beside you, without deciding anything at all about tomorrow. It can be picked straight back up in the morning if you want it. It will be exactly where you left it, on the grass, in the same shape, with the straps the same length. Nobody takes these things. In the entire history of the world, nobody has ever come along and made off with somebody else's grudge. But for the next few hours, you do not have to carry it, and you do not have to forgive anybody or reach any conclusion or decide what sort of person any of them were. There is nothing whatsoever to be worked out between now and the light. Let the whole weight of you be given over to the bed, all of it. Feel where you are held most, the back of the head, the shoulder blades, the hip and the shoulder, if you are lying on your side, the backs of the heels, and let each of those places hand over a little more than it was giving a moment ago. And then, after a breath or two, a little more again, and let the attention come down through you slowly now, without hurrying any of it, and without checking on the progress, and without minding if it gets lost along the way. Start at the very top and let it come down at whatever speed it goes. The scalp, loose. The whole of it, right back over the crown to where it meets the neck. The forehead, wide and cool and doing nothing at all. The space between the eyebrows going smooth and wide. The eyelids, heavy and no longer needing to be held anywhere. And the small muscles all around the eyes, which have been working steadily since you opened them this morning and have not been off duty once in 18 hours. Let all of those go now. Behind the eyes, where there is very often a quiet holding that nobody has ever mentioned to anybody, a sort of peering kept up all day. Let that rest back into the head, the cheeks soft and heavy, the jaw. Let the teeth come apart very slightly, so that they are not touching each other at any point. The tongue resting low and wide in the mouth, not touching the roof of it. The throat open and easy, with nothing being held in it. The back of the neck, long and unhurried and carrying nothing. The shoulders now, coming down and back and into the bed, and then further than that, and then further than you would think was possible. The shoulders are where this particular thing gets carried, in very nearly everybody, not the head, whatever people assume. The shoulders. That is where a person puts a grudge, and where they put a job they cannot leave, and where they put somebody else's opinion of them, and they have been up for years, slightly, not enough for anybody to comment on. Let them come all the way down now. Let them come down. The upper arms heavy, the elbows doing nothing, the forearms, the wrists, and the hands, both of them, the palms, the backs of them, and each of the fingers, one at a time if you like, all the way out to the tips, holding nothing at all, no paper, no invoice, nothing folded into four. The chest rising and falling on its own, without permission and without one moment of assistance from you. The ribs moving a little at the sides and at the back when nobody ever notices them. The belly, soft. That is the one that matters most and the one everybody forgets. Let the breath come down into it and let it lift and settle by itself without any help from you. The lower back, spreading and widening out into the mattress underneath it. The hips, giving their whole weight downward into the bed. The thighs, heavy all the way around. The knees, unlocked and doing nothing. The calves, releasing. The shins, the ankles, the tops of the feet, and the soles of the feet, which carried you through the whole of today and have not been thought about once since you took your shoes off. Let the whole front of the body be soft. The throat, the chest, the belly, the tops of the thighs. That is where people hold themselves ready without ever having decided to, and all of it can be put down now. And let the whole back of the body be heavy, the entire length of it, from the base of the skull down to the heels, pressing gently into what is underneath and going nowhere at all. And now the whole of you at once, warm, still, horizontal, in a dark room, in the middle of an ordinary night. The pack is off now. It is on the grass beside you, leaning slightly, the way they do. You can see it from where you are lying, and it is not going anywhere, and nothing about it requires you tonight. Whatever you came to bed carrying is on the grass beside you. It is not on your shoulders. It is not in your hands. Nothing whatsoever is being held up or held together or held onto by anybody in this room tonight. Let the breath come and go without any management at all. It has been running all evening without your supervision and has done perfectly well. And if the shoulders feel strange now, or light, or as though something has just this moment been lifted off them and they have not quite caught up, that is exactly what happens at the top of a hill. It does not mean anything. It does not require your attention or your interpretation. It is just a set of muscles working against nothing for a little while, until they notice. Let us rest here for a long while, with the pack on the grass. When you are ready, we will go on together quietly for the end of the night, because there is one more thing to say, and it is the honest one, and it is the person that almost nobody thinks of when this subject comes up. There is a man of 62 who has forgiven everybody in his life who ever wronged him, and has been carrying one thing since 1998, and it is not about anybody else at all. Let us go and sit with him for a while. He's 62, and he is a decent man by any measure that anybody would care to apply to him. He worked in local government for 31 years and was well thought of, in the quiet way that people in that world are well thought of. He has been married for 36 years, and he does the shopping every Thursday for a neighbour who cannot get out, and has done it for 4 years without missing a week, and has never mentioned it to a single person, including his own children. And in the autumn of 1998, when he was 36 years old, he made a decision about his mother. She was 81. She had been getting steadily worse for about 2 years, in the way that people do, in small steps that are only obvious afterward. And there was a conversation in a room with his sister and a woman from social services who was perfectly competent and whose name he cannot now remember. There were 3 options on the table. He argued for one of them, and that was the one that was chosen. There were reasons. There were genuinely good reasons, and anybody looking at it from outside would say so immediately. He had 2 children under 11. He had a wife who was ill for most of that year, and who got better afterward, but was not better then. He had a job in the middle of a reorganization that took 18 months and half his attention. And the option he argued for was, by any reasonable assessment made at the time with the information that existed at the time, entirely defensible. It was probably the right one. His sister thought so too. She was in that place for 14 months, and she died there on a Sunday morning in the November, with his sister present and him about 40 minutes away in a car. And he thinks about that room and that conversation and what he argued for about 4 times a week. 26 years of it so far. Now, here is the part of it that matters for tonight, and it is the reason this story is the 9th chapter rather than any of the others. Everybody in his life has forgiven him. His sister does not think he did anything wrong at all. She has told him so more than once, directly, sitting down, in a way that was clearly meant and not merely kind. She was in the room. She agreed at the time, and she agrees now. His wife thinks he did the only thing that could have been done by anybody in that year with what was on his plate, and gets rather short about it if it comes up. His children, who are in their 30s now, have no idea that there is anything to discuss. They remember their grandmother as somebody they visited and who had a budgie, and his mother, in the whole of those 14 months, never once said anything about it to him. She was by then mostly beyond that kind of conversation, and there is no way of knowing what she understood about where she was or why. but she was pleased to see him. Every single time he came, right up to nearly the end, her face did the thing it had always done when he came into a room. There is nobody left alive in the world who holds this against him, not one person, and he cannot put it down. He said to somebody about 2 years ago in a pub, having had one more than he usually has, "I would forgive anyone else for that in a heartbeat. If my sister had been the one who argued for it, I'd have told her not to be so daft and to give over." And then he looked at his drink and said, "I just can't seem to extend it to me. I don't know why that is." He goes to the grave twice a year, her birthday and the week before Christmas. He does not say anything when he is there. He tidies it up a bit and takes the old flowers off and stands about for 10 minutes and comes home. And his wife asked him once, quite gently, what he says to her when he goes. And he said, "Nothing. I just go." She said afterward that she thought that was the saddest thing she had ever heard from him, and that she had not known what to do with it, and that she made him a cup of tea. "Come back now gently to your own room, to the dark and the weight of the blankets, and the breath moving quietly in and out. Here is the last teaching of the night, and it is the one that a good many people listening have been waiting for without knowing it, because for a certain number of the people listening to this tonight, the grudge is not against a sister or a director or a father in a hospital bay or anybody who did anything to them at all. It is against yourself, and it has every single one of the features we have looked at tonight. The file that gets opened at 2 in the morning without any announcement. The details kept sharp and getting sharper rather than softer, which is not how ordinary memory behaves. The story polished by retelling, except that this one is only ever told to one person, and the case reviewed from the beginning, regularly, and found to stand up every single time, which is not surprising, because in this particular court, you are the prosecution and the judge and the only witness, and you have never once recused yourself in 26 years. The arithmetic from the first hour of tonight applies to it exactly and without any adjustment. 4 times a week, 26 years. That is something over 5,000 separate occasions on which a decent man has walked himself back into a meeting room in 1998 and stood in it again. 5,000. The woman with the envelope got to 1,200 and thought that was a great deal, and exactly the same question applies to it that applied in the first hour of tonight. Not, was it wrong? That question has been asked and answered 5,000 times, and asking it again will not settle anything. But what is the ongoing work costing, and who is receiving it? Now this needs handling rather carefully, because there is a cheap version of it that is offered constantly and does not help anybody at all. The cheap version says, "Be kind to yourself, you did your best, you mustn't dwell on it." And for a person carrying something genuinely real, that is worse than useless. It is actively irritating, and it tends to end the conversation, because it does not engage with the fact at all. It does not look at what happened. It simply asks somebody to stop thinking about a thing that they cannot stop thinking about in a warm tone, and then changes the subject with visible relief. He has been offered that version perhaps 200 times, and it has never once made any difference. So let us do it properly instead, which takes about 4 minutes and is not warm at all. Remorse and self-punishment are not the same thing, and they do opposite work. Remorse is what a decent person feels when they have done harm. It is appropriate, and it is not a problem to be solved. It is the correct response to having done something that cost somebody else. And it is precisely the thing that distinguishes a man like him from somebody who would do the same again next year without noticing they had done it. Nobody should want to be free of remorse. A person entirely free of it is not somebody you would want making decisions about your mother. And remorse has a direction to it. It points outward, away from the person feeling it. It produces things: amends, where amends are possible; change behavior, where the situation can arise again; or the shopping every Thursday for 4 years for a neighbor who cannot get out, which he has never once mentioned to anybody and would not connect to any of this if you asked him. Self-punishment does not point anywhere at all. It produces nothing. It repairs nothing. It changes no future decision, because the situation cannot arise again, and both his parents are dead. And above all, it does not reach her. She has been dead for 26 years. She was pleased to see him every time he came. There is no version of any of this in which 5,000 bad half hours at 2 a.m. arrive anywhere near her, or improve her 14 months by 1 minute, or reach back into 1998 and change a single thing about that room. It is the same coal, held in the same hand, being thrown at somebody who is not in the room, except that in this case, the person who is not in the room is a version of himself. A man of 36 in a meeting with 2 children under 11 and a wife who was ill and a job in the middle of a reorganization. That man cannot be reached. He cannot be warned or advised or helped in any way whatsoever. And he did not know what you know now, and there was no possible way for him to know it. That is worth saying plainly and slowly, because it is the crux of the whole thing. The person who made that decision did not have the information you have. He did not know how the 14 months were going to go. Nobody did. Nobody could have. He did not know what the other option would have been like, and neither do you, and neither does anybody in the world, because it did not happen, and there is no record of it anywhere. That is the part that never gets said in these cases. The alternative is always imagined as having gone well. It is never imagined as the version where she fell in the first fortnight, or where his wife got worse, or where the whole thing came apart in a different way that nobody would have predicted either. The comparison is always against a fiction, and the fiction always wins, because fictions do not have complications in them. So what is actually happening 4 times a week for 26 years is this: a man is being prosecuted for failing to know something that could not be known at the time, using evidence that only arrived afterward, and compared against an outcome that never existed. No court in the world would permit that for 4 minutes. He allows it about 4 times a week, and has done since 1998. And here is the thing that makes this chapter necessary at the end of a night like this one. Everything we have said tonight applies to you as well. Every chapter, without exception. Nobody has been excluded from any of it. Forgiveness is not saying that it was all right, including when the person who did the thing is you. You are not being asked to conclude that the decision was good, or that it does not matter, or that anybody should feel fine about it. It is not something you owe, including to yourself, which cuts both ways and is worth noticing. Nobody is entitled to it, And that means nobody can demand that you produce it on a schedule either. It is a practice done more than once, and returning to it is the practice rather than the failure, including here 40 times, at traffic lights, in the autumn mostly. And nobody is coming to release you from this one either. Not his sister, who has already tried more than once sitting down, meaning every word of it, because it turns out that other people's forgiveness does not reach this particular place. It cannot get in. He has heard it and believed that she meant it, and it has made no difference whatsoever at 2 a.m, which is where the sentence actually gets served. So it will have to be you, which is precisely the same conclusion that the man in the chair beside the hospital bed came to about a year afterward, with the greenhouse reglazed and the house sold. It is the conclusion at the bottom of every single chapter tonight, and it has been coming since the first one. Nobody else can do this part. Not the person who did it, not the people who love you, not anybody, which is either the loneliest fact in the whole of this subject or the most freeing one, depending entirely on what hour it is when you look at it. At 1 o'clock in the morning, in a warm bed, in the dark, it is very nearly always the second. Let us rest here for a while. If the person you have not forgiven is you, then that is who this last hour has been for, and it has taken all night to get here on purpose. You do not have to do anything about it tonight. Nothing has to be decided or resolved or worked out, and no verdict has to be overturned in the dark. Let the shoulders come down. Let the arms be heavy. Let the hands lie open on the blanket, holding nothing at all. Let the jaw come apart and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Let the breath come in and go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging it. You are allowed to rest, even with this in the room, especially with this in the room. Resting is not being let off. It is not a verdict. It is a body lying down in the dark for a few hours, which is a thing that even people who have done real harm are permitted to do, and which nobody has ever earned. Nobody has ever repaired anything at 4 o'clock in the morning. Not once in the history of the world. Nothing is being repaired tonight, and you are entirely permitted to sleep while the whole thing is still unfinished, because it has been unfinished for years, and it will still be there, unchanged, in the light. When you are ready, we will go on together, one last time, for the end of the night. Because we began 3 hours ago, with a piece of paper folded into 4 in the back of a wallet. And there is one last thing to say about that piece of paper, which is what was actually in the wallet all along, and which is not what anybody would have guessed at the start of the night. Let us go back to the builder one last time. He took it out of the wallet in 2022, about 8 months after he heard, at a job, from somebody else entirely, that the man had died, not as a ceremony. That should be said clearly. He is not a man who does ceremonies, and he would be genuinely embarrassed to be told that this one counted as anything at all, and would probably say that it was just a bit of paper. He was cleaning out the wallet because the card slot had finally gone, and he was moving everything into a new one that his daughter had bought him for Christmas. At the kitchen table, doing exactly what he had done at the same table in 2014, in the same chair with the same lamp on. And he came to the folded paper, and he sat there for a bit with it in his hand. He said he did not have any particular thoughts about it, and that he was slightly disappointed about that afterward, as though he ought to have had some. He said he was mostly aware of how thin the paper had gone, and then he put it in the bin with everything else that came out of that wallet, the old receipts, a loyalty card for a coffee place that had shut in 2019, the business card of a plasterer who had retired to Spain. It went in with the rest of it, and he tied the bag, and he put the bag out on the Thursday with everything else. He said afterward that the strange part of it was how little it turned out to be. 12 years, 2 wallets, something in the order of 1,000 tellings, with the funny bit and the pauses in the right places. And what was actually in his hand at the end of all of it was a piece of paper about 4 inches square, gone soft as cloth, split at 2 of the fold lines, with a total printed on it that you could no longer read without holding it up towards a light. He said it wasn't even a lot of money in the end. Not really. Not looking back at it. It felt like a lot at the time. And that is the whole of it, really. That is the entire subject, in 2 sentences, from a builder at a kitchen table with a bin bag open beside him. Because what that man had actually been carrying about in his back pocket for 12 years was not £4,000. It never was. The money was gone by about 2011, and he had absorbed it, and the business survived. What was folded up in there was a version of himself in 2009, a man of 47 in a bad spring, with 2 lads on the payroll and a mortgage and a job that had gone wrong through no fault of his own, standing in a car park at a garden centre on a Sunday, being looked at across the tarmac for about a second and a half by somebody who had taken something from him, who was not going to give it back, and who knew and knew that he knew that nothing whatsoever was going to happen about it. That is the whole of what was in that wallet for 12 years being taken out at petrol stations. Not a debt. A moment in a car park that lasted about a second and a half. That is what was folded up in the wallet. That is what went in the bin. He is 62 now. He still does the odd job, mostly small things, mostly for people he has known for 20 or 30 years and who ask for him by name. And he has not told that story since about 2021. Not because he decided to stop. It simply stopped coming up. And then he noticed at some point that it had stopped coming up, which is how these things go. And he said, when somebody asked him about it directly, that he does not think about the man at all now. Not with any charge in it. Not for years. But he said that he does sometimes think about the 12 years. That is the only part of it he minds about now. And there is nothing whatever to be done about that either, and he knows it, and he says it without any particular weight on it. It is simply a thing he notices sometimes, on a job, on a quiet afternoon. Come back now, one last time, to your own room, to the pillow, and the dark, and the weight of the blanket, and your own breathing going quietly on without you. Here is where we finish. It is the same place we started 3 hours ago, with a piece of paper in a wallet, and there is only one sentence in it worth carrying down into sleep. You are not letting them off. You are getting yourself out. That is the whole of tonight in one sentence. Everything else across 3 hours has been the same thing approached from a different direction. And notice which way round it goes, because almost everybody has it backwards. Nobody is being released tonight except you. They were never being held in the first place. Not for an hour of the 13 years. That was the illusion sitting at the very center of the whole arrangement. and it took the first 2 hours of tonight to take it apart properly. The rope only ever had one person on it. It always did, from the very first day. The invoice that lived in the back of a wallet for 12 years and through 2 wallets, and cost 12 years of a man's attention, and never once cost the man who did it a single afternoon. The 1,200 against the dozen, worked out on the back of an envelope with the dishwasher going. A sentence being served nightly for 13 years in a kitchen on the edge of a market town, while the only other person involved had no idea that there had ever been a trial. The woman who forgave her father entirely and completely, and who will not see him again before he dies, and who is not remotely confused about either half of that, and never has been. 11 years of anger standing directly in front of a factory that nobody had ever been given permission to mourn, and a man of 70 in a hotel car park finding out what had actually been underneath it all that time. An old woman in a good coat at a serving hatch, and a year that had been sitting in the foundations of somebody since she was 7, and a small permanent question answered in about 11 words by somebody who thought that a family ought to know. Nobody arriving at the hospital. Nobody ever arriving at any point in any of these stories. And a greenhouse reglazed over 2 Saturdays for a house that was already being sold, because it was the only thing that had ever actually been asked. 40 times, sometimes sitting down on purpose, and sometimes in 11 seconds at a set of traffic lights with the indicator going, and the intervals getting longer and longer without anybody being aware of it happening. A pack coming off at the top of a hill in September, and a pair of arms floating up on their own with nothing left to work against, and the plain astonishment of a woman finding out for the first time what she had been carrying since 8:30 that morning, and a decent man of 36 in a meeting room in the autumn of 1998, who has since been forgiven by his sister and his wife and his children, and as far as anybody can tell, by his mother as well, and by nobody else who counts. And not one of those asked you to say that anything was acceptable, not a single chapter, not for a sentence. That was never on the table tonight, and it was never going to be. And anybody who tells you that it is the price of this has not understood the teaching, or is asking you for something else entirely. The wrong stands. It stood at the beginning of the night, 3 hours ago. It stands now, and it will still be standing in the morning when all of this has gone out of your head and you are looking for the kettle. Nothing that happens in a dark room can touch it, and nothing tonight has tried. We were only ever talking about the maintenance, the unfolding, the retelling, the reviewing of the case at 2 a.m, the work. So let us finish in the one place where anything at all can actually be done tonight, not with 2009 or 2011 or 1994 or 1998. Those are all closed, and none of them is available at this hour, with a body, in a bed, in the dark. Let the breath come in and let it go out, and let the out-breath be the longer of the two without your arranging any of it. Let the shoulders come down one last time, all the way down, and then a little further. They have been up for a long while, longer than you know, and not only tonight. Let the arms be heavy from the shoulder to the wrist, and let the hands lie open on the blanket, palms soft, fingers long and slightly apart, in the way they fall when nobody is arranging them, holding absolutely nothing at all, no paper, no coal, nothing folded into 4. Let the jaw come apart, and the tongue rest low in the mouth, and the eyelids be heavy, and the space between the eyebrows go smooth and wide. Feel the warmth under the blanket and the cooler air on your face, and let both of those be true at the same time without needing to do anything about either. And let the whole weight of you be handed over to the bed, which has been holding all of it since the moment you lay down, without being asked, without any effort on its part, and without one single moment of assistance from you at any point this evening. We have kept a good deal of company tonight. There was a builder with an invoice folded into 4 in the back of a wallet, and then a second wallet, and a garden centre car park on a Sunday where nobody said anything at all. There was a woman at a kitchen table on a Wednesday evening with a pen and the back of an envelope, and a number she had never once thought to work out in 13 years. There was a daughter of a difficult father who has not seen him since 2015, and who calls what she did forgiveness, and means it, and is right. There was a man of 70 sitting in a car in a hotel car park on a ring road, crying about a factory for the first time in 11 years. There was an old woman at a serving hatch in a village hall with a cup of tea in her hand, and something she had decided somebody in that family ought to know. There was a chair beside a hospital bed at 5:10 in November, and a whiteboard with 3 strangers' names on it, and a conversation about the glass in a greenhouse. There was a district nurse at a set of traffic lights on a ring road, doing it for about the 40th time in 11 seconds, with the indicator going. There was a rucksack lying on the grass at the top of a hill in September, and a pair of arms that would not come down. And there was a decent man in a meeting room in 1998 who has been forgiven by everybody except himself. You do not need to remember any of them, not one. Nobody's going to ask you about any of it in the morning. None of it works better for having been remembered. And the story you slept through has done its job rather better than one you stayed awake to the end of. If one thing stayed, you are not letting them off. You are getting yourself out, or the intervals quietly getting longer, or a pair of arms floating up at the top of a hill. Then let that be enough. One is plenty. One is a great deal more than most nights leave behind. And if nothing at all stayed, that is enough as well, and it is not a failure of attention. There was never anything here to learn. There was no state you were supposed to have arrived at by the end of it. There is no test in the morning, and there never was. It was a long, slow night with a voice in it, going on about wallets and hills, so let the whole of it go now, all at once. The stories, the teachings, the arithmetic, the 3 hours of it, and this voice as well. And whatever it was that you came to bed carrying tonight, put it down, or do not put it down. It genuinely does not matter. Nothing in the last 3 hours has ever depended on you managing it, and nobody is going to check in the morning. Just stop doing the work until morning. That is all that was ever being asked of anybody. Not forgive, not release, not decide anything about anyone. Simply stop, for a few hours, the way you would put a pack down at the top of a hill. May the weight come off your shoulders tonight, and may you find out afterward what it was. May you be spared the long job of guarding something that cannot be changed by anybody. May whoever wronged you sleep, wherever they are, and may that cost you nothing at all. And may you rest now, unburdened and unbothered and entirely as you are, in a night that is asking absolutely nothing of you and never was. Thank you for spending these quiet hours here, whatever it was that brought you to them, and whoever it is you have been carrying. There is nothing left to do tonight, nothing left to settle or work out or decide, and no need to remember a single word of any of it. Set the grudge down. It will still be there in the morning if you want it. Nobody ever takes these things. Let the breath come and let it go, and let it come again on its own, without anybody arranging it, and let the night take you the rest of the way from here. Sleep well now, and good night.